Hey everybody, it's Josh Ronquist here for Heavy Debriefings, and as you can see right there, right there, it is the top 10 albums of March 2023 time, and this has been an exponentially fantastic month for music. Particularly in the latter half of the month, there have been so many great albums that have come out, and honestly, I've had to cut this down from my top 15, which took over an hour painstakingly deciding what 5 albums had to be cut out, and I'm not going to tell you what they are, you'll just have to guess that on your own. But when it came down to it, these were the top 10 albums that I listened to the most this month, my apologies. And of course, you know the rules. Alphabetical order, only original albums. Let's just get right into it. Coming in, first of all, in alphabetical order, is Enslaved with Heimdall. And it's so strange to me that people felt that the previous album, Utgard, was a step down in quality for Enslaved. I could not disagree more. I really felt like that was a great natural progression of the band. I loved the new clean vocals. I thought there was so much to love about it. But, all of that said, I do think Heimdall is a better album than Utgard, but I do appreciate what Utgard was able to accomplish. It was one of my favorite albums from that year anyways. But Heimdall feels better. It feels more conceptual, it feels like it's taking on something a bit new, and it also harkens back to some of the classic Enslaved era as well. You get your dark, evil black metal going on here, but it doesn't lose focus of the progressive side that Enslaved has been doing so well for nearly 2 decades now. The songs feel stronger, it feels like the new members of the band feel a little stronger and more confident on this album, and it just feels like an overall better conceptual album. And if you don't like the progressive side of Enslaved, I still feel like this might be an album that is still worth checking out, because it's not just proggy, there's a lot of great black metal elements going on here as well. But if you don't like the prog side, I totally understand. But for me, I feel like this really balances everything while still being able to cover new ground. And it's really hard for me to explain that new ground, it's just something you'll have to listen to for yourself to understand. All that said, a fantastic outing from Enslaved. Next up, we have Haken with Fauna. And this album kinda strays away from the more super metal elements that Haken has been doing over the last few albums, and it becomes much more experimental. It's still very proggy, it still has great heavy moments on there, but there's more electronica going on. There's a little bit of hip-hop rapping influence going on in some tracks. There's more poppy elements going on. It's really a free-for-all, if you will. Like, nothing is off grounds on this album. And honestly, I think it's a great approach, because not everything is tied together in a full-on concept album, it's more thematically going on, where like every song relates to a different part of the human experience told through animalistic metaphors. I think I'm using metaphor right. I apologize, I graduated in 2007, I'm forgetting some of my English words. But in all seriousness, I love this approach because, especially on the first listen, you don't know what to expect. And I love those kinds of albums where you just go in as a total surprise. And it's the same thing that goes into it with movies for me. Like, I don't like watching trailers to movies because I want to be blown away by what I'm experiencing. I want to get a general idea of what it's about, but I don't want anything spoiled for me. I just want to go in, know a little bit about it, and enjoy it for my own experiences. I guess you could also say that comes to reviews, but hey, you're already checking this out. But yeah, this, even though it is very experimental and you don't know what's going to happen, it also feels much more like a focused Haken album as well, because of the fact that it feels like this is what the band wants to do, rather than feeling like it's what they have to do. And when you can be freeform and experimental like that, some of the best music will come out there, and some of the best Haken songs ever created are on this album. So if you don't want something too metal, if you don't want something too poppy, if you don't want something too proggy, if you don't want something that's too anything, and you want a little bit of everything, like a buffet, Fauna is the album for you. Next up, we have a debut album from Harbored and their self-titled debut. This features a couple members of a Legion, oddly enough, who are so known for doing more of the tech death, progressive death, melodic death metal side, and they kind of flipped the coin on this album and wanted to be able to come up with something of the melodic, black gaze, atmospheric black metal style, and it's so cool to hear that. It goes to show that musicians aren't just good at one type of music, and if you let them experiment, they'll be able to cover so much more ground. The songs on here are longer, although, of course, I have some albums coming up that have much longer tracks, but it feels like full-fledged experiments into black gaze and atmospheric black metal on this release. And if you didn't know better, it would just feel like a band that's been around for years upon years. But I guess that goes with musical experience, doesn't it? The production is so good on here. It's what I love about black gaze. I mean, it's polished, but it doesn't sound like it's programmed, which is always a good thing. The songs really feel like they come from the heart, and after doing so much of Allegiant and everything that's been going on in the world of Allegiant, I'm glad a couple of the guys decided to step out and be able to have something else to be able to focus on for a bit, while Allegiant figures out what's going to go on with their next chapter of the band. I know this album is going to go under the radar because I don't see anybody talking about it. I don't see anyone reviewing this. I don't see anyone talking about it. I'm the first person I've seen talk about this one, and I don't like that. I want you to go and check this out. And if you like your black metal with a bit of that post sound and that atmospheric sound, and of course, black gaze, I highly recommend checking out the self-titled debut from Harvard. Up next, I have Keep of Calcium with Catharsis. And the band has gone through some changes over the last 8 years. And what band doesn't over the course of 8 years, unless you're AC/DC or Slayer or... well, that's a conversation for a different time. For Keep of Calcium, I really like what they're doing here. They're incorporating more death metal than they ever had before. Plenty of the melodic stuff, a little bit of progressive, which I was very shocked to see on here, especially when they have a 10-minute epic on this album as well. It's funny because I've seen some people say that the band kind of went up its own ass on this album, and I don't feel that way whatsoever. I feel like this is the kind of album that if you miss what's going on with Winter Sun, but you want something much more evil, Catharsis is that album. And I think that's because they introduced so much more mellow death into their sound. It's much more that melodic death metal side than they have ever shown before. There's still plenty of that mellow black, melodic black metal sound. The production is superb on this album. The vocals, I can understand why some people don't like them. I personally love them, but I understand if you don't. All I say is that you give it a chance and you check it out for yourself. For me, this is a damn fine album, and you should be checking it out. This is going to be 50-50. Either people are going to like it, or they're going to hate it, or think that it's okay. Up next, we have the third album from Lunar, the conceptual album known as The Illusionist. And this concept album feels like it was written about me. And by me, I mean people like me, myself, I, and anyone else that kind of deals with a lot of self-doubt, mental health struggles, and the like. It is a thinly veiled concept album about a man struggling to know if he's worth what he is. It's self-doubt, it's imposter syndrome, a lot of hate, a lot of things that go through the mind when you deal with mental health struggles and wondering if you're good enough to even exist, with a very strict twist at the end. What I do appreciate about this album, much like the Haken album that I talked about before, is this is another album where you don't know what to expect, and that was done explicitly, because the idea behind this album is it shows off a different side of all of Lunar's personality. There's some melodic there's some melodic death metal going on here, there's some progressive death metal going on here, there's some progressive rock, there's some elements that have nothing to do with prog or metal in general on this album. And it's all put together, and it feels like you're watching a movie of different scenes together that work together perfectly. It's almost kind of like a Pulp Fiction kind of thing when you look at it musically, but it is a straight-ahead story when you look at the lyrics and the concepts. This is another album that I'm seeing dangerously go under the radar right now, and that should not be the case. This is a fantastic album, and you need to check it out for yourself if you are a prog fan. Seriously. I can't imagine you'd be disappointed with this one. Up next, I got Night Demon with Outsider. And not only is this my favorite Night Demon album, this just has potential to be one of, if not my favorite albums of the year. I love everything about this. This is a conceptual album that is loosely based on Jarvis Leatherby's own venture from moving to from America to Ireland, and of course make it a horror story amongst that. But while the previous two albums were very fixated on the new wave of British heavy metal and the revival metal sound, I really feel like Night Demon found their sound on this album. Of course, there's elements of that style throughout the album, but the songs have more of that classic metal feel behind it. They have more of a almost proggy kind of feel behind it. It feels like a grand adventure throughout this entire album. Whether it gets slow, whether it gets speedy, whether it's just at the right pace. The choruses on this album are some of the best choruses Night Demon has ever written, and I just feel like this shows that revival metal is not just a gimmick. You can really truly make it your own, and they've done that here in strides. I can't say enough good things about this album, and especially over the last few years where my favorite album of the year is like very dark, very depressing music, very stuff that really messes with you mentally, because, you know, that's the kind of state of mind I'm in right now. I can honestly say this is going to be at least a top 10, if not top 5, if not top 3, if not the top album of the year for me. Every time I listen to this album, it just gets better and better. And if you like the classic metal sound, if you like revival metal, and if you want them to take their own little spin on it and make it a little more horror themed and make the band really truly sound like their own thing. And who knows? I mean, sometimes I guess that takes just moving out of the country, doesn't it? But seriously, if you need something like this, and I think we all do if we're a metal fan, yeah, seriously, check out this album. You will not be disappointed. Next up, I have Of Sulfur with The Burden of Faith, and I'm not normally one that enjoys deathcore music. I do have an appreciation for it for the fact that they're trying to do something different with death metal and hardcore and fusing it together, but I also grew up in the time where it was just about pig squeals and breakdowns. That is no longer the case anymore. Lorna Shore proved that last year with their latest album, and Of Sulfur is taking that in another new direction here with The Burden of Faith. They have some excellent guest stars on this album. Howard Jones is my favorite guest star that they have on this album, and probably does my favorite song on the album. But musically, they take deathcore and they add symphonic orchestral elements to it. They add some black metal territory, which I wasn't expecting. It's a little proggy at times, some atmospheric moments on here. The only time it's deathcore is when they do an occasional breakdown. And that's amazing to me, that a style that was just known for that so much has evolved so much. And it's really become its own thing, and I can really appreciate it when you do something so simple and you're able to expand upon it so much. This is, again, another band and album that I feel is really going to be going under the radar, especially if you don't like deathcore yourself. But as someone who doesn't personally enjoy it, I love what Of Sulfur is doing. And I think you'll be able to find something to appreciate yourself. So if you're checking this out, I highly recommend it if you want something that is much more than what it sounds like. Next up, I have the latest album from Redemption, I Am the Storm. And this is the second album with Evergrade's Tom England on vocals and Vikram Shankar on keyboards and orchestration. And I feel like this is such a great progression from Long Night's Journey into Day. It feels like the band is stronger, they feel more comfortable with who they are, and they're willing to experiment more on this album. There's more melodies and harmonies than the last few Redemption albums, and even Long Night's Journey into Day had some more uplifting moments on the album. This album has even more of that, which I appreciate. And as a longtime prog fan, I do appreciate the fact that they have some longer songs on this album again. There's 2 songs on here that go well past the 10-minute mark. And I miss that from Redemption because those are some of my favorite songs in the past. If you checked out my backwards marathon on Redemption, you'll see that I made the controversial take of putting this at an S ranking. And while it is not my favorite Redemption album, it is my favorite Redemption album with Tom England, and it is one of my top 3. I really love the experimentation and being able to show all the colors of their musical palette on this album, the bright colors amongst the dark colors, to make everything stand out just a bit more. And as great as Tom is on this album, I do feel like the real highlight of this album is Vikram's keyboards and orchestration throughout the album. He took a band that was already great at doing that and just expanded the sound and really introduced so many different new ideas to the band to make them more interesting than ever before. If you are a longtime Ray Alder fan and you don't want to check out Redemption without Ray, I think you're missing out by not checking out this album. While you may not like Tom England's vocals, if you don't like that dark, sad music of what Tom England is known for in Evergrey, I think you're truly missing out. And you're missing out on what he's capable of, along with the rest of the company in Redemption. Next up, I have the band Sermon with their sophomore album of Golden Verse. And this is another album, well, this whole month seems like it's filled with albums that are much more underground to a lot of things that came out. I mean, I know a lot of people have enjoyed some more of the mainstream stuff that have come out this month. I seem to be gravitated towards the stuff that people aren't really checking out as much, and I want to be able to show off these bands so you can check them out and see what you're missing out on. And Sermon is a great example of a band that you might be missing out on. Thankfully, the album comes out today if you're checking this out on release. On Friday, March 31st. This album has a little bit of everything. It's got progressive metal, it's got melodic doom metal, it's got dark metal, it's got a little bit of pop flavoring throughout. Lyrically, it's got some serious topics. Suicide on one of my favorite tracks, The Distance, talks about political powers taking all of our power away, and I know that's happening in the UK where the band is based out of. There's a lot of hard-hitting things that people have been dealing with pre, post, during, and everything going on with the pandemic, and there's a lot of hard-hitting feelings that goes on with that, and the music matches that perfectly. While the band is veiled in mysterious moments, I think this is a band that is absolutely worth checking out, and I know there's a lot of that going on right now. I mean, obviously Ghost is the most popular with that. Sleep Token is pissing a lot of people off with their style, which I truly appreciate, and it makes me like them even more. And Sermon is just off doing their own thing. Even if they are veiled in curiosity, that makes me more intrigued to go check them out. And when I finally did, I was so happy to be able to appreciate the album for everything that it is, and I really think it is one of the best albums this month and is going to rank pretty high on my best of the end of the year list. And if that sounds intriguing to you, I highly implore you, after this video, go check them out. Just check out a couple songs and see if it's for you. You might be missing out on something you'll really, truly enjoy. Up next, I have Woe Unto Me with Along the Meandering Ordeals, Reshape the Pivot of Harmony. And wow, that is a long title, and that's why you don't see the whole thing on the screen. But much like the long title, this is a long album filled with long songs, and if you haven't guessed by now, it is my sad fuckboy music known as funeral doom metal. Although I will say, rather than just being at the slow, dirging tempos, it actually does vary up quite a bit, much like My Dying Bride does. So it's not just like Mournful Congregation, it is a little more experimental with its sound. Although with only a few tracks on this album, and not a single one of them under the 12-minute mark, I still love everything that's going on here, and it's not for the faint of heart. It can still be slow, it can still be brooding, it still sounds sad. I mean, that's what happens in funeral doom metal. But if you're looking for something that's really going to rip your heart apart and give you that great cathartic feeling that comes along with that, Woe Unto Me probably did it the best this month. Mariana's Rest, which was one of the top 15 that I had to cut out of this list, is a close second, but I think Woe Unto Me does it just a little bit better. And it's another album that I know is going under the radar, but if you like Funeral Doom as much as I do, this is an album that is highly worth checking out. And that does it for the top 10 albums of March 2023. And let me know what you think of these albums. Are you actually going to go check them out? Are there any albums I forgot? Do you want to belittle me for my own personal opinion? All of that and more, leave it down below. And of course, like, comment, share, subscribe, all of that stuff. I recently hit over 900 subscribers. Only been at this since 2009, and have been doing that Drummer Guy since 2011, and Heavy Debriefings since last year, so yeah, finally! But seriously folks, thank you so much for this. I'm so close to 1,000, closest I've ever been before, so thank you so much for that. And until the top 10 albums of April 2023, my next Backwards Marathon, my next interview, review, look back on the top 10 albums of every year I've been alive, or any other kind of video I put up here on the Heavy Debriefings YouTube channel. For Heavy Debriefings, this is Josh Runquist saying, see ya.